name is Erin Fanning Madden. I'm an assistant professor at the University of New Mexico in the Department of Internal Medicine in the Division of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. My research is about addiction, mostly looking at addiction treatment services and social attitudes and social forces affecting treatment efforts. So especially looking at stigma, so negative sort of perceptions and discrimination towards people who work in treatment, people who use treatment services. I think for me too, this group of people is often marginalized in our society in ways that other types of diseases, disorders, conditions are not marginalized. Yeah. We have sort of this morality that we attach to their condition that I take issue with. They're sort of seen as people of low character. They're not strong enough to not be addicted, right? But none of that matches the science of how addiction operates. So I got really interested in that sort of social phenomenon where these people have a disorder or condition that really is not their own fault, but that society frames as being their own fault. I think, like a lot of people, I grew up thinking that addiction treatment was like what we see in the show Intervention or Celebrity Rehab, right? Which is where we kind of go to therapy and eventually we stop using drugs altogether, right? And we count the days after which we stop using drugs, right? We have this sort of what's called an abstinence-based idea of how we recover from drug use. Yeah. I didn't know what harm reduction was until I started working with a professor who is this general practitioner. She was a professor in the School of Medicine where I worked. Her name is Miriam Kamarami. I started working with her and she was talking to me about harm reduction. And I was like, that's really interesting. And she was saying it's not necessarily about stopping drug use altogether. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone's willing to do that. So how do we help the person in the meantime? We don't just let them die, tell them go away and come back when you're ready, right? Yeah. She said there's other things we can do. And she started explaining things like syringe and needle distribution programs, safe injection sites. And I sort of felt like the world opened up in a new way. Like I was thinking about drug use in a way that was really interesting and exciting. And I felt like, wow, why haven't I learned about this earlier? And then when I found out that other places have used these methods, they are tried and true, the research says that they work, I said, wow, I kind of got annoyed that I didn't know about these types of interventions. So then I got really excited and annoyed and fascinated, and it sort of snowballed to this being the focus of my work for the last 6 years.
How do you think the world would be different if we all embraced harm reduction?
I think less people would die. I think that's probably the most important thing to know, is that people don't have to sort of hit rock bottom in their addiction before they can be helped in some way. So harm reduction sort of says, let me help you with where you're at, and doesn't necessarily force you to move. So it's what people call low threshold program. So it says wherever you're at, we can work with that. It doesn't say you have to do this before we'll help you. Yeah. So I think it would bring more people into services much earlier in their addiction. I think it would also bring people into services who have struggled just like multiple times with recovery and treatment, because harm reduction says, even if you failed in the past at something you were working to do to get healthier, you can always come back, and we can start from wherever you're at when you come back. Through that approach, lives are saved, people are saved earlier on in their addiction. And I also think it would make for a more accepting society. It sort of allows people to be sort of in their condition with less judgment, and says, you really do have an illness. It has social factors that contribute to it, of course, but it sort of allows us as a society to be nicer about that person's sort of life. I embrace a harm reduction approach to thinking about drug use. So when someone tells me about drug use in their family, their own past, or I see people in sort of my everyday life that I see are clearly being affected by their own substance use, I would say I don't think negatively about that person. I tend to think, if I can offer resources, I'm in the right space or situation for me to offer resources, I do. So for example, I had a roommate in graduate school. Her sister's husband is currently addicted to heroin, and they sort of like don't know what to do. Yeah. And I think, I was in a group of women, I was actually at my book club, and people were sort of saying, oh, that sucks, is she going to leave him and stuff? And there was sort of these conversations about the effect on her sister, and there was sort of the assumption that her sister was going to leave the father of her children and stuff. Yeah. And my friend was sort of like, no, she's not going to do that. Like, we're just trying to figure out what to do. And so I sort of talked to them a little bit about harm reduction services. I actually gave them a naloxone kit from the state of Utah that I had on me. And I taught her how to use it, and then she gave that to her sister. And so I do think when people tell me about addiction and stuff, like I'm oftentimes one of the few people they talk to who's not judgmental and just sort of offers some things that they can do that they usually didn't know existed. Most people don't know about harm reduction unless you've been someone who uses drugs yourself or had someone in your family who uses drugs. And even then, you might not know.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it's useful to know that there are resources, there are things that work. Because I think most of the time our cultural narrative is you have Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and residential treatment. And and all of those require abstinence. And for someone who's not ready, that's just not the most effective approach for them, unfortunately.